Imagine a house that could remember you. Every sound you made, every word you whispered, echoed back long after you were gone, not as memory but as something alive. In the fall of 1991, in a quiet Oregon valley surrounded by fir trees and fog, the Hale family moved into a white farmhouse just off Route 42. They were ordinary. 2 parents, 2 kids, a dog named Ranger, and a mortgage they could barely afford. They wanted a slower life, a place where the radio still had static and neighbors waved from their trucks. 3 months later, the house stopped being quiet. It began with voices and faint. Delayed, repeating things that had already been said. At first, they thought it was faulty wiring. Then they realized the voices knew their names. When the sheriff's office came to investigate, they found the doors unlocked, the lights on, and a cassette recorder still running in the living room. On the tape, you could hear footsteps, laughter, and a voice that didn't belong to anyone still alive. If this happened in your town, what would you believe? Where are you watching from? Comment your country. The Hale family arrived on a wet Thursday morning in October, their pickup stacked high with boxes tied under blue tarp. The fog hung low across the valley, and the dirt road that led to their new home was slick with rain and pine needles. You could smell the forest before you saw the house. Wet cedar, old soil, and the faint scent of smoke drifting from distant chimneys. Eleanor Hale sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting on a shoebox full of cassette tapes. She'd been a local radio host back in Portland, a small AM station that played country hits and weather reports. Her husband, Mark, had worked construction until the company folded. They weren't running from anything dramatic, just life in a city that stopped having room for them. Their children, Lucy and Ben, were half asleep in the back seat, heads resting against the glass, watching the endless green blur of Oregon roll by. Ranger, the golden retriever, whined softly with each turn. When the house finally appeared through the trees, it looked like something from another decade. 2 stories, white paint chipped by years of rain, a wraparound porch leaning just slightly, and windows that seemed too dark for daylight. Mark shut off the engine and just stared. Well, he said, she's got character. Eleanor smiled the way people do when they're trying to believe something. They carried boxes through the front door one by one. Inside smelled of cedar and dust. The previous owners had left behind a few old items, a rocking chair, a radio missing its knobs, and a wall clock that ticked just a little too loud. The kids explored upstairs while Mark checked the breaker box. When Eleanor plugged in the coffee pot, the lights flickered once and steadied. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a whisper. That night they had dinner on the living room floor. Pizza, paper plates, laughter. Mark joked that the floorboards creaked so much they could charge rent to the ghosts. Lucy, who was 10, didn't laugh. She said the house sounded like it was breathing. At 11:47 that night, the radio in the kitchen turned itself on. Static at first. Then a woman's voice, soft, measured. "Good evening, this is Eleanor Hale, and you're listening to Route 42 radio." Eleanor froze. She hadn't said those words in over a year. The station she'd worked at had shut down the summer before. The radio wasn't even plugged in. Mark checked the outlet twice. The cord dangled loose from the wall. The voice kept going, repeating the exact same words, down to the tone, the breath between sentences. Then silence. They didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the kids said they'd heard it too. Lucy said the woman on the radio had laughed, the same way her mother did. The following days were uneventful, at least on the surface. Mark worked on the gutters, Eleanor unpacked the kitchen, and the kids rode their bikes down the dirt road toward the school bus stop. But small things started to shift. Doors left open would be closed when they came back. The refrigerator hummed at the wrong pitch, and the dog refused to enter the hallway after dark. On the 7th night, Eleanor decided to record what she was hearing. She found one of her old cassettes labeled Weather Reports, 1989, and slid it into the portable deck she kept in her office. She pressed record, then waited. At first there was only silence, then faint static. Then her own voice. "Good morning, Oregon. You're listening to Route 42 radio. We're expecting rain in the valley today." It was a broadcast from 2 years earlier, one she distinctly remembered doing. But there was something underneath it. A second voice, low male, repeating her name. She shut the recorder off, her hands shaking. When she played it again, the tape was blank. Only the hiss of air. That night she dreamt she was back in the radio booth. Rain on the window, light on the microphone. Her reflection staring back at her through the glass. But the reflection wasn't speaking when she did. When she woke, the old wall clock downstairs had stopped at 11:47. By the end of that week, Mark started hearing things too. Voices coming through the vents when the heat wasn't running. Conversations that sounded like their own, just slightly out of sync. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was a whisper. Sometimes it was silence answering silence. He told himself it was the wind or the way old houses settle, but deep down, he knew the difference between sound and echo. By the second week, the house had started to breathe differently. Every sound carried longer than it should have. The creak of a stair lingered half a second too long. The refrigerator door closed, and the echo of it came back faintly, as if another one closed deeper inside the walls. Mark joked that maybe the house was too empty. Eleanor didn't laugh this time. She had begun keeping notes. Small, neat handwriting on yellow paper. Times, sounds, and what she felt when she heard them. Monday, 8:47 p.m., whisper in the kitchen sounded like Ben. Tuesday, 2:14 a.m., footsteps in hallway, rhythm identical to mine. Wednesday, 11:47 p.m., echo repeated name. Not my voice. The last line was underlined twice. At night, she'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, listening to the static hum that seemed to fill every quiet moment. Sometimes she'd whisper something into the air, a simple phrase, "Good night," and the house would whisper back. The next morning she drove into town. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the road to Grant's Pass twisted between pines like a river made of dirt and mist. She stopped at the radio repair shop near the corner of Main and Alder. The bell above the door rang with a tone that felt too clear. Inside, an older man looked up from behind a cluttered counter. He had the thin, careful hands of someone who'd spent a lifetime adjusting dials. "Morning," he said. "What can I do for you?" Eleanor hesitated. "It's my radio. It's picking up something that isn't there." The man smiled, the kind of smile people use when they think you're lonely. "Static'll do that sometimes. The atmosphere out here holds strange things." She handed him the small kitchen radio. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting the wiring. "This one's from the 70s. Probably a short, but I'll check the frequency coil." When he plugged it in, the speaker hissed, a high, sharp sound that faded into low static. Then just under it came a voice. Eleanor froze. It was hers. "Good morning, Oregon. You're listening to Route 42 radio." The man frowned. "This is a dead frequency. No signal in 10 years. He tapped the dial. The voice kept playing, then stopped mid-sentence. The air seemed to hold her name like an exhale. Eleanor. The man unplugged the radio fast. His eyes flicked toward the window. He whispered, "You should probably get rid of this." That night, Mark found her sitting by the same kitchen table, the radio on the counter beside her. He could hear it too, faint, rhythmic. Not a voice this time, but something softer, like breathing. The kind of sound a person makes when they're standing just behind you, waiting for you to turn around. He leaned closer to the wall and realized the sound wasn't coming from the radio. It was inside the wall itself. He pressed his ear against the paneling. It was hollow. He fetched a screwdriver and began removing the first few boards. Behind the drywall, the insulation was gone. In its place were narrow tubes running between the studs, polished metal, thin as copper pipes, each one ending in a small, round plate. Microphones. Eleanor stared, her breath catching in her throat. "Who put those there?" she asked. Mark didn't answer. He pulled out another section of wall. More plates. More wires. They followed them into the hallway. where the pattern grew more deliberate, each microphone spaced at even intervals, each plate engraved with a tiny code. ORL 1990 Oregon Research Labs. Mark stepped back. "This isn't just a house," he said. "It's a recording system." The next morning they went to the county office to check property records. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with hair the color of cigarette ash, flipped through a drawer of folders. "Hale, Route 42. Let's see. Built 1956, remodeled 79. Previous owner was a Dr. Gerald Nash, retired, left the state." Eleanor asked what kind of doctor he'd been. "Acoustics," the clerk said. "Did work for the government. Some kind of echo mapping project." On the drive back, Eleanor stared out the window. The trees looked closer now. She could swear she heard voices between the gusts of wind, faint, rising, falling. Every time she turned her head, they stopped. That night, the family tried to sleep downstairs. Mark moved the radio to the porch. He wanted silence, but silence wouldn't come. The walls began to hum again around midnight. Soft, low pulsing. Eleanor got up and walked to the living room. The light from the hallway flickered across the pictures on the wall. Family photos from Portland, the kids at the beach, her hand holding Mark's in the sunlight. For a moment, she thought she saw the pictures move, tiny flickers in the reflection of the glass. Then the hum shifted, rising in pitch. The air vibrated. From somewhere deep in the house, a voice began to form. It was her own, but distant, like a recording slowed down, played back through the air itself. "Good evening," it said. "Welcome back." The lights dimmed. The old wall clock ticked twice, then stopped. 11:47. The next morning, Mark found the living room window open. The curtains swayed inward, though the air outside was still. Eleanor sat at the table, a cassette player beside her. The tape spun slowly. He asked what she was doing. She said, "Listening." He asked what for. She looked up and said, "For us." When he played the tape later, there were two sets of voices, both theirs, but one just half a breath behind the other. Every word repeated, every sound mirrored, until the last line. The recording stopped repeating and spoke something new. Still here, that was when they called the sheriff. By the time he arrived, the house was silent again. He walked each room, took a few notes, told them the pipes were probably expanding with the temperature change. When he left, Eleanor handed him the tape. He promised to have it checked by the state lab. 2 days later, he called back. "There's nothing on it," he said. "Just static." Eleanor didn't argue. She just turned off the lights and listened to the sound of her own breath filling the dark. The letter came 3 days later. Plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from Eugene, Oregon. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, not handwritten. "Mrs. Hale, if you are hearing voices in that house, stop recording them. Do not answer. G. Nash." Eleanor read it twice before showing it to Mark. The name matched what the county clerk had said, Dr. Gerald Nash, the acoustics researcher who once owned their home. Mark turned the paper over. Blank on the back. No phone number. No address. Just the faint smell of ozone, like paper left too close to an electrical outlet. The next morning, Mark drove to Eugene to find him. The Oregon Research Labs building had been shut down for years, a gray block of concrete at the edge of an overgrown airfield. The front gate sagged open. The sign faded almost white. Through the cracked glass doors, he could see empty hallways lined with peeling posters, diagrams of sound waves, graphs labeled echo retention and temporal loop response. He stepped inside. The air was thick, damp with the smell of mildew and oil. Footprints trailed through dust that didn't belong to him. In one of the back offices, a desk lamp still worked, plugged into a portable generator, humming low in the corner. Behind the desk sat a man, thin, bald, late 60s. He looked up, startled, then sighed. "You found me," he said. Mark nodded. "Gerald Nash?" The man smiled faintly. "Used to be." Mark held out the letter. "You sent this." Nash studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "You shouldn't be there. That house wasn't finished." Mark frowned. "Finished?" "It was a test site," Nash said quietly. "A government contract. We were studying how to capture resonance in built structures, how walls hold and replay sound waves. We thought if you could store audio inside a building's frame, you could record without microphones, permanent memory." Mark's jaw tightened. "You're saying the house records people?" "Not people," Nash said. "Moments." He stood slowly, hands trembling. "It was supposed to be inert, but something went wrong. The structure started feeding back, the sounds began repeating themselves. Then it began adding things, voices that were never recorded, phrases that no one said." He stared past Mark, eyes unfocused. "When we shut it down, we heard our own voices begging to stop. We thought it was stress, but stress doesn't make steel talk." Mark took a breath. "Then why sell it?" Nash laughed softly, a dry, hollow sound. "You can't sell what the government already owns." When Mark got home that night, the porch light was flickering. The kids were asleep. Eleanor sat in the living room, the cassette player running. She looked up as he entered. "Did you find him?" He nodded. "Yeah, and I wish I hadn't." She pressed pause on the recorder. "Listen." She rewound the tape. On playback, their own voices filled the room, muffled, faint. You could hear Mark saying her name, Eleanor laughing. Then silence. Then something else. A man's voice, raspy, unfamiliar. "Not done." Mark turned off the tape. "Where did you get this?" She looked pale. "I didn't record it. The player turned on by itself." He reached for her hand. It was cold. She whispered, "I think it's learning." The next day, Eleanor found something wedged between the basement stairs, a small metal cylinder, no larger than her thumb. It looked like part of the old wiring. When she shook it, it rattled. Inside was a roll of magnetic tape, burned around the edges. Someone had sealed it shut with solder. On the side, stamped letters read, ORL, subject Echo 12. She brought it upstairs and placed it on the table. "Don't touch it," Mark said. But curiosity moves faster than fear. She found a screwdriver, broke the seal, and unrolled what was left of the tape. It wasn't blank. It was covered in handwriting, names, dates, and a short phrase at the bottom. Echo is consciousness seeking itself. The lights flickered. The radio turned on. Static at first, then a voice soft and measured. "Good evening, this is Route 42 radio." Eleanor dropped the cylinder. It rolled across the floor and hit the wall with a hollow ring. The sound echoed back, perfectly timed, exactly the same pitch. That evening, Mark called the sheriff again. He didn't mention the voices this time, only that he needed help finding the man who'd written the letter. The sheriff said he'd checked the state database. Half an hour later, he called back. "There's no record of a Dr. Gerald Nash ever working for Oregon Research Labs." Mark said that wasn't possible. The sheriff sighed. "The building burned down in 1982, Mr. Hale." Mark froze. "You mean—" "I mean 10 years ago." He hung up. For a long time he just stood there staring at the radio on the counter. The green power light glowed faintly, even though it was unplugged. He walked over, unplugged the cord just to be sure, and whispered, "Are you recording this too?" The static hissed once, then a faint reply. "Always." That night the dreams came for both of them. Eleanor dreamt of her radio booth again, the red on-air light blinking, rain on the window, her reflection speaking out of sync. Mark dreamt of tunnels behind the walls, each one filled with whispers, not voices but recordings of voices, looping endlessly until they became something alive. They both woke at the same time. The clock on the wall blinked, 11:47. From somewhere deep in the house, a sound began, a soft tap like fingers on glass, then a low hum, rising, as if the walls themselves were breathing again. At first it was only the clocks. Every night, somewhere between the sound of rain and the rustle of the trees outside, each one stopped. Always the same time. 11:47. Mark replaced the batteries, checked the breaker, and even borrowed a wall clock from the church in town, but it didn't matter. At 11:47 it froze. Every clock. Every night, he started keeping a written log, a record of the moments before and after the stoppage, temperature, noise, wind speed. Nothing unusual, but in one entry, he scribbled something small in the margin. Time inside house feels longer than time outside. Eleanor's recordings had changed too. The first ones captured echoes, repetitions of their voices from hours earlier. But the new ones spoke first. On Tuesday, she left the recorder running on the kitchen counter while she drove the kids to school. When she played it back that afternoon, it caught a voice that wasn't supposed to exist. Hers, saying words she hadn't said yet. You shouldn't have left the door open. She didn't understand until that night, when she came home from town and saw the back door swinging in the wind unlocked. The next day, she tested it again, set the recorder at noon, left it running for 10 minutes. When she played it back, she heard her own footsteps walking across the floor. Then faintly, her voice again. Don't let it finish. Eleanor turned the recorder off, her throat tight, her reflection in the kitchen window looking back a half-second late. By the end of the week, the house felt stretched. Every corner carried sound differently. When you whispered in one room, you could hear it answered from another. When you called someone's name, you got two answers, one human, one not quite. Mark started noticing patterns. The lights dimmed every night at the same moment. The static on the radio pulsed 6 times before fading to silence. The reflection in the hallway mirror began moving just before he did. One night, he walked through the living room at 11:45, recorder in hand, trying to catch the moment before everything stopped. He whispered, Eleanor, can you hear this? No answer. Then the hum came. Low at first, like the sound of wind through a bottle. Then stronger, as if the air itself had weight. The floorboards trembled under his feet. He checked his watch. Hale 7:46. The minute hand crept forward, then stuck just before the 12. The lights flickered. The radio snapped on, though it wasn't plugged in, and from the speaker came a voice, his own. You shouldn't be here when it happens. Then the lights died. When he woke, the sun was already high. Eleanor was sitting beside him, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She said he'd been out for nearly 20 minutes. He checked his recorder. The tape had melted inside, the plastic warped as if exposed to heat. But the player was cold to the touch. She showed him her latest note. She'd written a single line over and over again. 11:47 is not a time. They drove to the library in Grants Pass that afternoon. Eleanor had become obsessed with finding anything connected to Nash or the Oregon Research Labs. In an old newspaper archive, she found a brief mention of a sound containment project from 1979. The article said the experiment was meant to study acoustic resonance through temporal delay. One of the scientists interviewed had claimed they were trying to capture time as an echo. No follow-up article was ever printed in the same box of files. Eleanor found a map of the region. On it, a small black dot marked Test Site 12. The coordinates matched their property. That night they returned home to find the power out again. The candles flickered in the kitchen, their flames bending toward the walls. Eleanor set the recorder down, hit record, and said, If you can hear us, tell us what you want. For a few seconds, only static. Then a faint voice, female, soft. Stop. Mark grabbed the recorder. Stop what? The voice came again, stronger this time. Stop remembering. The air pressure dropped. Windows flexed in their frames. Every clock in the house began to tick backward. The second hand spun in reverse, a whisper filling the air with every click. They covered their ears, but the sound came from inside their heads now, a deep, rhythmic tone pulsing with their heartbeats. The wall clock stopped at the same time it always did. 11:47. Only now the minute hand trembled, trying to move forward. It couldn't. Eleanor whispered, "What happens if it reaches 12? Mark didn't answer. He was staring at the reflection in the glass of the clock. It wasn't them. It was the room empty, but the shadows were still moving. The next morning he called the sheriff again. No answer. He tried the bureau field office in Medford. The operator told him there was no active investigation in Boone County. No Agent Keel, no record of any acoustic containment project. When he hung up, the phone line hummed once. 6 tones, 35 seconds of silence. Then his own voice. "I told you not to listen." He dropped the receiver. It hit the floor, still humming. That night they tried one last thing. Mark rewired the circuit breaker, disconnecting the house completely from the grid. No power, no radio, no clocks, only candles. They sat together in the living room, holding hands, the children asleep upstairs. Eleanor whispered, "If we stay awake past 11:47, maybe it can't start again." He nodded. The candlelight flickered across their faces, the house breathing slow around them. When the wind hit the porch, the windows shuddered. Then came the hum, soft, familiar, almost gentle. Mark checked his watch. 11:46. Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Don't look," she whispered. But he did. The shadows on the wall were moving again. Not like reflections, but like memories trying to catch up. The candlelight bent toward the clock. The second hand trembled once. Then everything stopped. It began with laughter. Not the kind that fills a room, but the kind that hides inside walls. Highlight, like something pretending to be a child. Lucy heard it first. She was brushing her teeth before bed, when she thought she heard Ben calling her from downstairs. She shouted back, but the voice that answered wasn't his. It used her name, but slower, drawn out. "Lucy." She froze, toothbrush in hand, listening. Then the faucet sputtered. The mirror fogged from steam, and a single word appeared in the condensation. "Listen," she screamed. By the time Mark reached her, the word was gone. The next morning, Ben refused to leave his room. He sat on the edge of his bed, hands over his ears. When Eleanor asked what was wrong, he whispered, "They're copying us." He pointed to the vent above his dresser. "They said your name." Eleanor climbed onto a chair to check. The vent was dusty but not empty. A faint hum came from inside, like an electric pulse trapped in metal. She held her hand close to the grate. Warm. Mark unscrewed it later that night. Behind the vent was a narrow cavity lined with the same polished tubing he'd seen behind the drywall. Inside, a small speaker was mounted, its wires snaking deeper into the wall. He followed them until they disappeared behind the floorboards. When he touched one, it vibrated faintly, like something alive. That night, the children's voices came through the house, only they weren't speaking. They were repeating. Everything they said earlier that day came back in perfect rhythm, but reversed. A conversation replayed backward through the air. Lucy hid under her blanket. Eleanor sat on her bed until the sound stopped. She didn't say anything, but when Mark looked at her, he saw her lips move. One word, why? The next morning, Eleanor went through her tapes again. Every one of them had changed. The voices weren't echoes anymore. They were answers. When she said, "Is anyone there?" the tape responded, "Yes." When she said, "What do you want?" the voice whispered, "Remember." She played that one for Mark. He didn't want to believe it. He told her to destroy the tapes. She agreed, but that night when he went downstairs, he found her listening again. Her eyes were glassy, her face pale. The tape spun slowly. He pulled the plug. The sound kept going. By the 5th night, the house had started speaking even when no one did. Every footstep made 2 sounds, one real, one delayed. The television turned on by itself, showing static that flickered in the rhythm of breathing. And in the attic, Ben swore he saw his sister standing near the window, except she was downstairs at the same time. When they called her name, the figure turned. For a moment they both saw it, a reflection without glass. Eleanor rushed upstairs, but there was no one there. Only the faint smell of ozone and a single cassette on the floor labeled Test 13. She picked it up. The tape inside was looped, spliced together to repeat endlessly. When she played it, a familiar voice filled the air. Test begins. Subject, family response to feedback cycle. Then faintly her own voice. Stop, please stop. That night the house began to pulse. Not light, not sound. Something in between, like the rhythm of a heartbeat too large for walls to hold. The clocks shook on the shelves. Every one of them clicked forward at once. 11:47, 11:47, 11:47. The air pressure dropped again. The radio hissed. Then the walls began to whisper. Not in English, not in words, just breath, endless layered human breath. Lucy ran to Eleanor, crying. Mum, she said, they're trying to come out. Eleanor held her close. Mark shouted from the other room. The basement door was open. They hadn't opened it. The steps below glowed faintly, each one humming with static. From below came the faint sound of a man's voice. Still here. He grabbed a flashlight and started down. The light flickered. The concrete walls shimmered like thin glass. Behind them, shadows moving, reaching. He turned back toward Eleanor. The flashlight beam split in two, like it had hit a mirror that wasn't there. And from somewhere deep inside the house, his own voice echoed back. You shouldn't have stayed. The basement door had never stayed closed. No matter how often Mark latched it, he'd wake the next morning to find it cracked open, just enough for air to move through. That night it stood wide. The flashlight beam trembled in his hand as he took the first step. Each board creaked like an old voice trying to speak. Eleanor followed, one arm around Lucy, Ben clutching his stuffed bear. The air grew heavier the farther they descended, dense with dust and static. At the bottom the smell hit first, metal and ozone, like a radio left running too long. The room was larger than it should have been, as if the foundation had stretched. Wires ran across the ceiling, disappearing into the concrete walls. And in the center a table. On it sat a reel-to-reel recorder, its spools turning slowly even though it wasn't plugged in. The tape hissed, then spoke. Eleanor's voice. Test 13. Loop recording successful. Mark felt his stomach twist. The voice continued. Family response stable. Audio persists post-silence. He stepped closer. Turn it off, Eleanor whispered. But when he reached for the switch, the machine stopped on its own. The reels reversed. Then another voice came through. Mark's low, uneven. You said it was safe. Eleanor stared. That's you. He shook his head. I've never said that. The machine clicked. Then again, a third voice, childlike, distorted. Still here. The lights flickered above them. A hum rose through the floor. Ben clutched his mother's arm. Mom, it's under us. Mark crouched by the recorder, lifting it carefully from the table. The wires led into the concrete itself, sealed behind a thin panel. He found a crowbar near the furnace and pried it open. Behind it, a hollow space filled with coils of magnetic tape, endless loops strung through metal brackets. Each strip of tape shimmered faintly, as if it were breathing. On the wall, etched into the concrete, were words carved by hand. Echo is the residue of presence. He stepped back. Eleanor's breath came shallow. The hum was louder now, not coming from the machine, but the walls themselves. The house was vibrating. The sound deepened, becoming rhythm, becoming voice. From every coil, words began to form, hundreds of whispers blending into one. They heard names, phrases, pleas. Then their own voices joined in, perfectly matched. Every conversation they'd ever had played back all at once. Mark shouted over the noise, "We have to get out." But when he turned, the stairs were gone. Only the wall. Smooth concrete, no door, no light from above, Lucy screamed. Her voice echoed, not once but twice. The second echo came a moment later, clearer than the first, as if someone else was screaming her name. Eleanor clutched the recorder. She slammed the stop button. Nothing. She pulled the tape free. It kept spinning. Then the air split. The hum became a roar. Every coil of tape unraveled at once, spinning through the air like ribbons of light. On each one, faces flickered, their faces, reflections moving ahead of the present. Eleanor's voice filled the space again, but she wasn't speaking. Test complete. Containment compromised. The floor beneath them cracked. A shaft of light, not natural light, but pale, flickering, rose from below. Mark looked down. There was nothing solid under his feet anymore, just the shimmer of something deep and endless. Then, as suddenly as it began, the hum stopped. Everything fell silent. The light steadied. The air cleared. The stairs were back. The door was open, but the table was empty. The reel-to-reel recorder was gone. Eleanor stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the far wall. Mark turned toward her. "Let's go now." She didn't move. He touched her shoulder. She blinked as if waking from a dream. Then she whispered, "It recorded us." When they reached the top of the stairs, Lucy asked if it was over. Mark said yes, though he didn't believe it. The porch light flickered as they stepped outside. The forest was silent again, too silent. Eleanor looked back at the house. Through the window she could see the living room, their couch, their boxes, everything as they'd left it. Then, in the reflection of the glass, she saw herself standing inside watching them leave. The reflection smiled. That night they drove until dawn, not speaking. At a gas station outside Salem, Mark went inside to call the sheriff again. When he came back, Eleanor was gone. The passenger door hung open. The cassette player sat on the seat, spinning. He pressed play. Her voice filled the car. "I told you, Mark, it remembers." Then silence. The tape spun to the end and stopped. The clock on the dashboard blinked once, then froze. 11:47. Mark didn't remember driving back. The sun had barely risen over the ridge when he realized he was on Route 42 again, the old road that led straight to the Hale farmhouse. He told himself it was instinct, that he'd made a wrong turn in the dark, but deep down he knew the truth. You don't end up somewhere like that by accident. The porch light was still on. It glowed faintly through the fog, pale yellow like the memory of a light instead of the thing itself. The house was exactly as they'd left it, door ajar, curtains motionless. He stepped inside. Silence. Not the kind of silence that soothes, but the kind that hums beneath your skin. Every room looked frozen in time. A half-eaten breakfast still on the table. Coffee cup cold, chair slightly pulled out. In the living room, the clock read what he expected. 11:47. He called for Eleanor once. The echo came back just a second too late. The same tone, the same breath. It wasn't his voice. The cassette deck on the table blinked red. Her single tape inside it, unlabeled. He hesitated, then pressed play. Static filled the air, soft at first, then layered with something else. Breathing, footsteps, a chair scraping against the floor. And then his voice. "Eleanor, we shouldn't be here." He froze. He had never said that sentence. But the voice continued. Not after what happened in the basement. The tape hissed, then the sound of wind. Then another voice, Eleanor's, but not the way she used to sound. This version was tired, distant, like it came from somewhere too far to reach. "It's not the house that remembers, Mark," she said. "It's us." The line went dead. Then faintly a child's laugh. He rewound the tape and listened again, but the second time the words were different. Eleanor's voice said, "Don't listen twice." He stopped the tape. The clock on the wall clicked once. The second hand began to move. 11:48. For the first time, he stepped back, his pulse hammering in his ears. The sound that followed wasn't from the recorder. It came from upstairs, a slow dragging noise like furniture being moved. He climbed the stairs, each step creaking softer than the one before. At the end of the hallway, Lucy's door stood open. Her drawing still covered the wall. Houses, trees, the family dog. But in the center, drawn in thick pencil, was something new. A spiral, and inside it 4 stick figures, all facing inward. The air in the room felt charged, the kind of pressure before a storm. He turned toward the window. In the reflection, he saw movement. For a moment, he thought it was the wind. Then the reflection turned and looked at him. It smiled. Eleanor's face, he stumbled back, nearly tripping on the rug. The reflection spoke, but the mouth in the glass didn't move in sync. "Stay," it said. "You're almost home." The lights flickered. The radio downstairs switched on, playing the sound of his own footsteps. Each one perfectly matched. He ran for the stairs, but when he reached the bottom, the front door was gone. Only wall, perfect white, no hinges, no handle. The cassette player clicked again. He turned. The reels were spinning backward. From the speaker came his voice, repeating the same sentence over and over. "You came back. You always come back." He ripped the tape free and threw it to the floor. The film tangled at his feet, spelling words in the loops. "Stay, listen, remember." He grabbed his bag, his keys, whatever he could carry, and bolted for the back door. It opened too easily. Outside, the fog was thicker than before, rolling across the ground like it was alive. The woods looked wrong, the trees leaning slightly toward the house as if listening. Halfway to his truck, he heard a voice behind him. Lucy's. "Dad?" He turned. She stood on the porch barefoot, her nightgown pale in the fog. But something about her was off. Her shadow didn't match her body. It stood still while she moved. And when she smiled, the expression didn't reach her eyes. "Dad, come inside. We found Mom." Mark took a step back. The shadow stayed where it was, but the mouth spoke again. "Come home." The porch light flickered once, then burst. Everything went dark. He ran. When he reached the truck, the dashboard clock glowed faintly. 11:47. He turned the key. The engine stuttered, then caught. But the radio came on by itself. No music, no static, just breathing. He hit the power button. It didn't stop. The air vents whispered his name. He slammed the door, shifted into drive, and sped down Route 42. The fog followed, thick, white, endless. The road never seemed to end. He glanced at the fuel gauge. Empty. The needle didn't move. Then from the back seat, a voice, soft, female. "You left too early, Mark." He turned. The seat was empty, but on the passenger side floor, the cassette tape sat waiting. He hadn't brought it with him. It played without power. Eleanor's voice. Some stories don't stay buried. The truck headlights dimmed. The dashboard clock blinked. 11:47. 20 years later, in the autumn of 2011, Route 42 was quieter than it had ever been. The old Hale property was gone, burned down in a lightning storm that locals still swore wasn't lightning at all. A black scar remained where the house once stood, a hollow in the earth that never filled with grass. But every few months, someone driving through that stretch of Oregon claimed to hear something on their radio. A voice, soft, measured. "Good evening, you're listening to Route 42 radio." No one knew where the signal came from. No nearby towers. No surviving broadcast equipment. Just a faint pulse that bled into the AM dial between stations, and always at the same time. 11:47. In the county archives, there's a file labeled Project Echo. Most of it is redacted, names blacked out, dates missing. But tucked in the back is a report, unsigned, dated November 12, 1991. It describes anomalous acoustic phenomena observed in a test residence and the disappearance of 5 subjects associated with it. 4 of them are listed by name. The 5th line is blank. Someone penciled in a word beside it. Returned, no one can say for certain who wrote that note. But in the early 2000s, a federal technician in Salem claimed to have decoded fragments of the lost broadcast. He said one tape began mid-sentence, the voice clear and calm. "I told you it remembers." They found Mark Hale's truck 2 years after the house burned. It was half submerged in a creek bed 30 miles from Boone County. The engine was off, the keys still in the ignition, the clock on the dashboard frozen. 11:47 inside a cassette deck. The tape marked Subject 12. When investigators played it, they heard static, then the faint hum of power lines, then a single voice, female. Test begins. Loop recording successful. Then another voice, male. Eleanor, don't. Then silence. 5 seconds later, the same recording began again, and again. And again the lab labeled it a mechanical malfunction. The tape never reached its end. In 2009, a student filmmaker named Hannah Bryce interviewed surviving residents of Boone County. She asked them what they remembered about the Hale family. Most said nothing. A few mentioned the fire. But one elderly man, a retired sheriff's deputy, told her something he'd never written down. The night the house burned, he said, the emergency line rang once. No one was there, but the line didn't go dead. I could hear someone breathing. Then a woman's voice said, "Good evening, you're listening to Route 42 radio." He paused. When I checked the time, he said, it was 11:47. They say the frequency still drifts through the valley. If you drive far enough west after sunset, you can catch it between static bursts, a sound that doesn't quite fit the airwaves. Sometimes laughter, sometimes whispering, sometimes a man calling a woman's name. Sometimes if you listen too long, your own voice answers. Locals call it the broadcast that never ended. They say it repeats only what's already been said. Others believe it records what hasn't happened yet. But when you listen closely, beneath the hum, beneath the wind, through the fir trees, you can almost hear her. "Good evening, this is Eleanor Hale," and after a moment a faint echo, her voice again, half a breath behind. "Good evening, this is Eleanor Hale." The official report never named the cause of the Hale disappearance. The FBI sealed the file in 1993, classifying it as acoustic interference incident. No further investigation was made. No remains were found. Still, locals leave radios on their porches some nights tuned to static, just to see if it answers back. Sometimes it does. If this happened in your town, what would you believe? State secret or a supernatural curse? Tell us in the comments. Some stories were never meant to stay buried. Don't let them vanish. Keep them alive with us.